Boxing Source here, and we got a few things that we're going to be going over for this weekend, as we're going to go through a few news and notes as we're going to take off for the next couple of weeks doing the podcast show. So we're not necessarily going to have anything in store for Blog Talk Radio, so we're just going to go through a few things here and there in the sport of boxing. Just going to go through a few topics here in a couple of these divisions with news and notes that happened over the course of the week in the sport of boxing. First off, give a shout out to all of those in the boxing communities, online, on radio and print, especially online with these boxing groups that are out there. Boxing Brotherhood on Facebook, Boxing Lounge on Facebook, SM Boxing on Facebook. Quick shout out to Adam Abramowitz, who runs that particular Facebook group. And also shouts out to the boxing groups that are, on Google Plus. You have Boxing Aficionados. You have Boxing World, among others. And once again, shouts out to the YouTube channels that are out there: Boxing Ego, Boy Brand 74, Dante's Boxing Nation, 78 Sports TV, among others that are out there that are keeping people abreast of what's going on here in the boxing world. So shouts out to them. But getting into what's going on here with the boxing news that's happened here over the course of the week. I wanted to start off in the heavyweight division. As we recently had something here on the Boxing Source YouTube channel with Jarrell Big Baby Miller, telling y'all what's been the deal with the World Boxing Organization and how they're handling what's happening with the WBO Heavyweight Championship. Of course, we know that Joseph Parker recently won the WBO Championship in a contenders match between him and Andy Ruiz Jr. He was able to get that decision win over Andy Ruiz Jr. Over in New Zealand in a couple of weeks ago, with when we had a bunch of high-profile fights going on December 10th. So he was able to win that WBO championship, and so World Boxing Organization was trying to figure out who is going to be the next in line to fight or to be the highest ranked contender for Joseph Parker. We had reports earlier that the winner of that fight could fight David Haye, or have David Haye be the highest ranked guy there. But David Haye right now is going to be in a fight with the WBC cruiserweight champion Tony Bellew. So they're seeing here who would be that next guy that would be up there. And with their new rankings that they have David Haye at number 1. They have Hughie Fury at number 2, Vladimir Klitschko at number 3, Jarrell Miller at number 4, and Andy Ruiz at number 5. And with news of this, Jarrell Miller has had something to say about what's going on with the World Boxing Organization, and how it's crazy how they allow Hughie Fury to get that number 2 spot when they were trying to get a fight put together between him and Miller to be part of an eliminator, or 4-way eliminator, for seeing who would be amongst the top there for the World Boxing Organization Heavyweight Championship. So a big shout out to Jarrell Big Baby Miller, giving us his piece on what's happening with the World Boxing Organization. So you're going to see if there's going to be any clarification on that WBO title here in the next few weeks or so. Of course, he had Joseph Parker, after winning the belt, saying that he wanted to see if he could get in there with Deontay Wilder for a title unification bout, but that may be further along in 2017 as Deontay Wilder will be taking on a voluntary defense for his WBC heavyweight championship. He'll be going against Andre Warzik, who's the number 12 guy in the WBC rankings so far. Of course, Deontay Wilder will have his first fight back from his injuries that he suffered during the fight against Chris Arreola earlier this year in that voluntary defense. Now, while Wilder has that voluntary defense against Warzik, there's still a little bit of clarification that needs to be made with the World Boxing Council, as on December 17th, we were supposed to have a interim heavyweight championship bout between Roman Severn and Alexander Povetkin. And of course, we know that Povetkin got caught with another substance before that fight, and Severn ended up saying peace out. So Povetkin ended up fighting Johan Duhaupas that was sitting on the bench, and Povetkin scored a knockout win over Duhaupas. And right now I'm going through fightnews.com, and I'm seeing that Alexander Povetkin is still there at number 1. Roman Severn is at number 2, and we have a new entry in the WBC rankings. And that new entry is at number 3, and his name is Luis Ortiz. That's right, King Kong Ortiz is the number 3 guy there at the WBC. Kind of shaking things up, as, you know, he had a fight on the undercard of Anthony Joshua's defense against Eric Molina. And he did have a few choice words to say about Deontay Wilder after his fight that he had in England. And with that, I guess, WBC said, hey, we'll add Luis Ortiz there in the WBC rankings. Now, that's kind of interesting that they add him in the rankings, because we have, of course, we have this big fight coming in April 29th between Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko. Anthony Joshua being the IBF champion, Vladimir Klitschko being the former unified heavyweight champion before losing those belts to Tyson Fury in 2015. Now, it seems like there may be a little bit of activity going on after that fight takes place. The winner of that fight will be the IBF, IBO, and the WBA super heavyweight champion. However, there have been announcements that whoever is the winner of that fight, they'll have mandatories in line. We have here in Boxing Scene that the Elliot Foster, that the IBF has ordered that Kubrat Pulev be the guy that is the mandatory for the IBF heavyweight champion. Kubrat Pulev is right now at number 2 for the IBF, and there's nobody rated at number 1. This comes after the news that Luis Ortiz would be the mandatory for the WBA belt. Now, Luis Ortiz has been up there at number 1 for a good amount of time. And, he's been waiting in line for his shot at one of these major belts. He's had 3 fights in 2016. He's had 3 fights and 3 wins. He had the Tony Thompson fight in March. And then he had basically 2 fights in a matter of weeks. As like I said, he had the fight there in the undercard for the Anthony Joshua Eric Molina fight. And that was before, not before, but after he went up against Malik Scott on November 12th in Monte Carlo and fought to a unanimous decision. Remember at one point, he won the interim WBA World Heavyweight title, and this was like back in 2014, and so he's been floating at number one for the WBA Heavyweight Championship for over a year, or at least 2 years now. So it's been pretty much a waiting game for Luis Ortiz to see if he'll be able to get a heavyweight title shot. Maybe it'll be for the WBA belts. Of course, we know that he's under Eddie Hearn, so if Joshua ends up beating Vladimir Klitschko and wins all of those belts, you might see Eddie Hearn make a fight between Anthony Joshua and Luis Ortiz, or maybe Luis Ortiz tries to go after Deontay Wilder later in 2017. Now, more news in the heavyweight division. We have the situation that went on last week with Alexander Povetkin. Of course, like we've been saying here in these shows on the Boxing Source with the previous podcast show, and like I was mentioning a little bit earlier in this video, Alexander Povetkin was scheduled to fight Bermane Stiverne last weekend, but Povetkin ended up with a positive sample for a banned substance. Now it seems like it has become even more complicated. After the sample that came back on December 6th said there was a positive trace of ostarine, now it seems like the test that came back on the 13th from Veda said it came back clean. So now, here we go once again with Alexander Povetkin and his team, which includes his promoter, Ryabinski, saying that there was only a very, very minor trace of ostarine in his system. That was detected on December 6th. Now, the thing with ostarine is kind of different than, when Povetkin was tested positive for meldonium. Ostarine is a substance that many athletes use during training, builds up endurance, which is like an anabolic steroid. And the World Anti-Doping Agency had already put that substance in a banned list many years ago. But here with this test of December 13th with Povetkin coming up clean, I guess it brings Ryabinski and Povetkin with another claim of, some type of, circumstance where they were able to find this trace of ostarine in Povetkin's system as a matter of circumstance. If, as they say, that the trace of ostarine was a very, very small trace, then it seems like the World Boxing Council may excuse Povetkin yet again. And if they do so, then he will probably, as I was stating earlier, stay at number one in the WBC rankings.
and will not be suspended, will not be reprimanded, will not have any type of punishment. And I guess he'll come off scot-free yet again, which will upset a lot of fans and boxing writers alike, with him having 2 positive tests of drugs within his system within 1 year. So it's going to be a waiting game with Povetkin and the World Boxing Council. We'll see what Mr. Suleiman and the council will do here in the next few months. They said that there was an investigation put in place, and that this one will have a decision much sooner than the one that happened earlier this year with Povetkin's instance with meldonium, where it took a few months for them to excuse Povetkin for that positive sample of meldonium. Let's see if they'll do the same here with his positive sample of Ostarine that came up on December 6th, but Veda was able to test him again on December 13th and have a clean sample. So it almost seemed like the same thing yet again, where 2 tests became negative, 1 test became positive, and then the next test after that became negative. So we'll see what the World Boxing Council does in that particular case. Next on slate is what went down in the middleweight division this week. And we're going to go towards what was reported by Dan Rayfield. This was coming actually in the previous week. He posted it last Friday. As we were just getting news that Saul Canelo Alvarez was pretty much in negotiations to fight Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Thing about that is of course we know that Canelo Alvarez is the lineal middleweight champion of the world. He did have the WBC middleweight championship this year and defended it once against Amir Khan, and then vacated the belt when he didn't want to go into full negotiations with Gennady Golovkin and didn't want to have that fight go into purse bid for a potential 2016 fight. So he gave up that WBC belt and went on ahead and moved down to 154 pounds to fight Liam Smith for the WBO Super Welterweight Championship and won that fight by knockout. So they were still seeing if they could have negotiations with Gennady Golovkin and his team, which includes Tom Loeffler, the man at K2 Promotions. And we had a few months ago after that Canelo Alvarez Liam Smith fight, we were talking about what Oscar De La Hoya said after the fight, that they sent out an offer that was 8 figures. Now, nobody knew what the specifics of that was. We were saying that it was $10 million. A lot of people, including myself, were saying that was something that I think Gennady Golovkin should take. The highest amount that he's had was $5 million in that fight against Kell Brook. So they were saying that maybe it would be $10 million, but it's looking like here through Dan Rayfield that it may have been much more than $10 million. In his article where he talks about the potential of a Canelo Alvarez Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fight happening on Cinco de Mayo weekend. He says that Gomez, who is with Canelo's team, says that he wanted to still see if he could get that fight with Gennady Golovkin done. Eric Gomez is the president of Golden Boy Promotions, with, of course, Oscar La Hoya being the figurehead. They're still trying to see if they can make that fight between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin in September of 2017, which is what Oscar La Hoya said numerous times. Gomez said that Golden Boy and Golovkin promoter Tom Loeffler had been talking about a deal, but the biggest obstacle has been Golden Boy's insistence on paying Golovkin's side a flat fee, while Golovkin's side wants to have a stake, which is as much as 40% in the event. Now, Dan Raphael posts here on his blog on ESPN.com that figure was at least $15 million. Now, that is 3 times as much as what Gennady Golovkin has made in a fight. And yet, Golovkin's side wants 40% in the event. Now, what they're banking on is that the fight between Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez would make in upwards of $100 to $150 million total. And this has been the topic of discussion in many boxing boards, amongst the boxing community, online, through YouTube, and everything like that. Like I was saying before, I wasn't sure that Gennady Golovkin deserved $10 million. And here I still say that Golovkin doesn't deserve $15 million. And even with that, if you're being offered $15 million, and that it has actually been the case, you should take it and run. And the reason why I say that is because the speculation of Gennady Golovkin's team about the potential earnings of this fight are a little bit higher than what I feel it will be. After what happened with the Mayweather-Pacquiao super fight in May of 2015, there really hasn't been that much of a successful pay-per-view card that have brought people to actually pay for these fight cards. I think up to this point, we really haven't had a pay-per-view that has reached 1 million or more buys. The closest one was the matchup between Canelo Alvarez and Miguel Cotto that was around 900,000 buys. And that generated $58 million in pay-per-view revenue. And so the expectation for Tom Loeffler and the team for Gennady Golovkin is that the potential fight between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin will surpass 1 million buys and have a revenue that's over $100 million. Now, going by simple numbers, let's put this as simple numbers. If you're going to have this Gennady Golovkin Canelo Alvarez fight on pay-per-view, and it's going to get to 1 million buys, in order for it to have $100 million in revenue, in that case, it would have to have a $100 pay-per-view presentation. So, you would have to have 1,000,000 TVs, or a million people, or 1,000,000 households, or whatever it is, buy that event at $100. And you really have not had something like that almost in history, especially for a fight between someone that has had, while he's been involved in a pay-per-view that had $2.4 million, or not $2.4 million, but 2.4 million buys, pay-per-view buys. And his opponent was Floyd Money Mayweather. That particular fight was on Showtime, and that generated $150 million. With 2.2 million pay-per-view buys, $150 million. And that was on the premise of, one, Floyd Mayweather being undefeated, going up to this super welterweight division and fighting an undefeated at the time Canelo Alvarez, who was coming off a good win against Austin Trout to win another super welterweight title. On top of that, that was predicated on these buyers of the pay-per-view trying to see if Floyd Mayweather will lose. Okay. That's what made that pay-per-view successful. They wanted to see if Canelo would be the man to beat Floyd Mayweather. That is why Mayweather-Pacquiao had over 4 million pay-per-view buys, because a lot of people were saying for years that Manny Pacquiao would be the man to beat Floyd Mayweather. Here, you don't have that thought of, okay, I want to see this particular fighter lose. This is the guy that I want him to fight in order to see if he's going to lose. Now, it may be something in the side of Gennady Golovkin where you have people that want to see Gennady Golovkin lose, but here at this point, we really haven't seen that much interest in Gennady Golovkin. Now, he did have one pay-per-view where he fought David Lemieux, and that went to 150,000 pay-per-view buys as reported. And that's against David Lemieux, and unless if you're in Canada, you really don't know who David Lemieux really is that much. So now here with Canelo Alvarez, you do have the Mexican fans there that's behind him. But you don't have enough people to want to see Gennady Golovkin lose to have enough people to buy the pay-per-view to reach 1 million. And especially if that pay-per-view is going to be presented at $100, even at $90, even at $80, even at $70. There's not enough interest in the boxing circles and outside of the boxing circles that would make people be interested in buying a fight card that would have Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez for it to reach 1 million pay-per-view buys or over $100 million pay-per-view revenue. So that speculation by Tom Loeffler is out of the cards, I feel. So that $15 million, I'll take it and run. One last thing about it before I close out. It seems like a lot of people that are siding with Gennady Golovkin and his team don't realize that Gennady Golovkin is not as popular as Manny Pacquiao was. Now, I did have a video about a couple of months ago, asking if Gennady Golovkin was the next Manny Pacquiao, but I'm not seeing that it would be the case here. And the reason why I say that is because Manny Pacquiao actually built up a resume in his career going up the weight classes to garner that popularity. So you did, see him against the likes of, Juan Manuel Marquez, a Marco Antonio Barrera, and Eric Morales. And that was all before he got that fight with Oscar De La Hoya. And so after that, he still had a resume, building up his resume against Ricky Hatton, against Miguel Cotto, against Antonio Margarito, against Shane Mosley, and of course the third and fourth fight with Juan Manuel Marquez, and of course that still controversial loss to Timothy Bradley Jr. So he built up a resume where people knew who Manny Pacquiao was, and he was in good fights against fighters that were pretty much, at or near his equal. Gennady Golovkin has not had that at the course of his career, and a lot of people feel that he's been fighting guys that are not at his level. It is not because of him being really good, it's because of his opponents being fairly average. And so, with that being known, you can't necessarily measure the popularity of Gennady Golovkin to a Manny Pacquiao. It's not even close. So if you add that factor in, you can't see that a pay-per-view between Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez, which knows 1 million pay-per-view buys. And I was looking at an article here with that what happened with Alvarez Miguel Cotto, and that pay-per-view fight, HBO pay-per-view fight between Alvarez and Cotto that reached 900,000 pay-per-view buys was an end of an era, actually. Now, of course, we know about what happened with Ken Hirschman, who used to run HBO Sports. He was, out of there. But at the end of the year 2015, you also had an exit of a pay-per-view guy there, where you had the HBO Senior Vice President Mark Taffet at 2015 leave HBO Sports there, and he was the person that oversaw the pay-per-view franchise for HBO. So his last hurrah, so to speak, was Cotto Alvarez. Taffet was there at HBO for 32 years. So now, well, of course, we've seen over the course of 2016 that a lot of these fights that, kind of were supposed to be on HBO Sports or HBO World Championship Boxing have been on HBO pay-per-view. You've had the Victor Postol and Terrence Crawford fight on HBO pay-per-view. You've had the Canelo Alvarez Liam Smith fight on pay-per-view. You've had the Andre Ward Sergey Kovalev fight on pay-per-view. And at the very least, 2 of those 3 fights should have been on HBO World Championship Boxing. But it seems like HBO Sports has really limited the times that HBO can have a World Championship Boxing telecast on their network. And so, that being known, that has really irked boxing fans. And they're still hurt or sour or whatever it is from the Mayweather-Pacquiao telecast. So going into 2017, these pay-per-view numbers, or these lackluster pay-per-view numbers, are going to carry over. Even though Pacquiao's last fight was not on HBO pay-per-view, it still had fairly low numbers for Pacquiao standards. The Kovalev Ward fight got 160,000 pay-per-view buys. Coming into 2017, we're going to have 2 pay-per-view telecasts with Gennady Golovkin fighting Daniel Jacobs and Miguel Cotto fighting James Kirkland. Those fights there in 2017 have low numbers, then that would really entail that the potential fight between Golovkin and Alvarez will not reach 1 million pay-per-view buys, and therefore is not a $100 million pay-per-view fight. So with that being said, I'll close out for this week. Be sure to catch the Boxing Source on Go Long Media every Sunday. We're going to start it back up in January 8th on Blog Talk Radio.